In this video, I'm going to show you just how easy it was to turn these two exposures into this final image. Let's go. Okay, so this isn't a video that I'd really planned to do, but in my last video I did a photo shoot in a canyon, and one of the things about shooting in a canyon with light coming in from above is it's a really contrasty scene. Very bright highlights, very dark shadows. So throughout the video I mentioned that I was shooting multiple exposures to deal with that. And I had a couple of suggestions, recommendations, requests that I should do a video on how I combined those exposures. And I thought, yeah, why not? Because it's actually pretty easy. And that's what this video is going to be. I'm going to show you how I combined and then very roughly how I processed one of those images in Lightroom. And it is really easy. I hope you'll enjoy this video. If you do, and you're not yet a subscriber, then please consider hitting the subscribe button at the end. And if you're already a subscriber, then thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Anyway, let's go back and just very quickly look at the on location bit where I actually shot these two exposures. Vertical orientation, portrait orientation, looking along the canyon. It's pretty dark in the foreground. There's light coming in up in the top there, spilling down into the background, lighting up the walls over the back. The contrast in this is massive. I'm going to do two shots. The first shot will be 6 seconds, f11, and that should give me all the detail that I need in the darker areas. And then I'm going to do a second shot, which is going to be a 20th of a second. That's a massive difference. But that will hopefully let me keep all of the detail in the brightest parts, including the sky. Okay, so that's the two exposures shot. Now what we'll do is we'll go into Lightroom and I'll show you how I brought them together and then very quickly how I did the processing on them. And it shouldn't take very long. Okay, so here are the two images in Lightroom. And you can see this one very definitely exposed for the shadows. We've got quite a lot of detail in the rocks, but the sky is just completely blown out. The second image was shot to keep detail in the sky, and we've got a nice blue sky here, but pretty much all of the rest of it is just almost completely black. If we look at the histogram, it's almost completely dark. So the first thing to do is to combine those two exposures to get a single image. Now, because Lightroom produces a raw file out of the merge, I don't need to do any processing on them first. All I'm going to do is select both images. I can do right click and then photo merge and then HDR. Lightroom then produces a preview image, and these are kind of my default settings for the HDR merge. I have auto align turned on because if the camera has moved even a fraction in between the two compositions, auto align should bring the image together so that everything lines up properly. I have the auto settings turned off. Some people I know like to turn that on because then when you get the image into the normal editing mode, it's already got some suggested settings for you. So if I click that, it will give me a suggested settings for it, but I prefer to leave it off. And I have the deghost set to none because there's nothing moving in this scene. So deghosting is all about trying to take out those sort of, well, ghosts of moving things, but there's nothing moving in here. So all I'm going to do now is click merge, and Lightroom will now create a merged image from those two exposures. Okay, so Lightroom's going to create a brand new file with a massive dynamic range, and I'm going to use local selection tools to decide how I make use of that dynamic range, how I bring out detail or hide detail, boost shadows, reduce highlights, whatever I want to do to make the image look its best. It's not just a case of merging it and then leaving it. It's about being selective. Okay, so here is my merged exposure. You can see it's got a new label, HDR. It says number 3 just because I've been playing around with a couple of versions of it, and it's a DNG file, which is a raw file. So it's got all of the data in. Basic processing, I'll go in and do my lens corrections first, remove chromatic aberration, enable profile corrections. Into my basics. Now the way it's done this at the moment, the sky is still showing as blown out and we've got lots and lots of dark shadows. So I'm going to bring the highlights back until I get some detail in the sky. And then I'm going to bring the shadows up until I've got some details in the rocks. I'm going to bring the highlights back a little bit more, get a bit more blue in the sky. Okay, I might be able to bring my white point up just a little bit, so I'll hold down the Alt key while I move the slider across to see when it starts to clip. Yeah, just about there. And the blacks are pretty much where they need to be. I'm going to put in some vibrance, probably to about there. I'm actually going to lift the overall exposure because it's still looking a bit too dark in the middle. So if I lift the exposure, actually I'll lift it by about a stop and bring the highlights back a bit further to counter that. What we have to be careful of is too much contrast between where I'm lifting the shadows in the rocks and the blue in the sky here can create an edging effect which doesn't look good. And that's what we've got at the moment. So about there, I think. Okay. At the moment, I'm not completely happy with the way that sky has come out, because if you look at it, it actually looks darker at the bottom than it does at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put in a radial filter and up near the top there like that. And all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make that all a bit bluer in the top there, and maybe just drop the exposure just a fraction. Too much. And of course that's also affecting the surrounding area as well, which I don't really want it to do. So I'm going to use the range mask, click on colour, click on the selector, and I'm going to select the blues. And if I now actually show the mask, you can see it's now only affecting the blue area. A little bit more like that. And in fact the top there also looks a bit too bright, so I'm going to do the same on that. Put that in. Just bring make it a little bit bluer. Bring the exposure down, and then set the range mask again. Colour, and just the blues. Yeah. What I now want to do is kind of brighten up the middle of the scene quite a bit, because that's actually where the light was falling. So I'm going to take a radial filter, put it in about there. It's inverted, so it's affecting the inside of the filter. And I'm going to warm that whole area up a bit. I'm going to lift the shadows quite a bit in there, and that's also helping with my graduation on the sky. And in fact I'm just going to lift the saturation in there a bit as well. I'm going to duplicate that radial filter, drag the duplicate down and put it down here a bit. and then duplicate it again and drag it over there a bit. Just really concentrating the light on this centre part, which is where the light was actually falling. I've actually got a little bit of flare going on right up in the top of the rock here, which doesn't look very nice. So I'm going to again use a radial filter. I'm going to pop that in there like that. And I'm going to bring the shadows back, because actually that rock should be quite dark, but where I've lifted the shadows it's brought out detail that I don't need to be there. Leave the exposure where it is, just bring the shadows down like that. Now the only problem is that's affecting the blue in the sky as well. If I turn on the filter you can see there's a little bit of it overlapping there. So again, range mask, colour, little dropper selector, click there, and it's no longer affecting that. It's probably a bit too extreme actually. Bring the shadows up a little bit more. No, that looks too dark now. Put a little tiny bit of dehaze in there, because that sometimes works to take out a little bit of flare as well. Just that pale effect where the sun was hitting that too much. Can't get rid of it completely, but it'll certainly look better. Okay, I think there's a little bit sort of more warmth and brightness required in some of these rocks here, so I'm actually going to use the brush tool. I know a lot of people don't like to use the brush tool, but I don't mind it. I'll put a bit in there, lift the shadows a bit more, maybe a touch of saturation. Put the auto mask on because that helps to keep me within the lines. Set my flow at, I don't know, about 50%, just over. I'm just going to brush a bit of warmth in here. And here, and down on the bottom here. I might even just tweak the exposure up a fraction. And I think this could probably take a vignette as well, so let's drop a vignette in there. Darken the edges. I think it's a little bit too bright over on the right hand side here, so I'm going to drop in a graduated filter like that and just pull the exposure back. A little tiny bit just to darken that side. Concentrates all of the focus on the middle, which is really what we want, and helps to balance the dark left hand side as well. And that's it. That's how I produced that image. So that was it. Final image. That's how I did it. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider giving it a like or a share or both. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Comments down below. And I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. So thank you very much. And until the next video. Bye.